We are back here on the desk here with John Ramdeen and Robin Black to chat about the UFC's always fun and dramatic welterweight division, because we now have a championship rematch to discuss. That is Tyron Woodley taking on Stephen Wonderboy Thompson on March the 4th, and we've got Donald Cerrone taking on Jorge Masvidal next weekend in Denver, Colorado. So a lot of interesting moving parts as always at 170 pounds, and to me, it's still probably the deepest division at the moment in the UFC.
Yeah, and we're seeing the changing of the guard. You look what happened with BJ Penn. You know, I know over the last number of years, people have been asking the question, is George St-Pierre coming back to mixed martial arts? If BJ Penn's performance and when you see the passing of the torch, if that's any indication, I don't know if George is going to come back to mixed martial arts, because the game has changed. Is he staying with the trends? And you know, you look at Johnny Hendricks doesn't look the same anymore. Is Cowboy and Masvidal, are those guys different than anybody else at 170 pounds? You know, Tyron Woodley is, or Stephen Thompson is, but is Masvidal and Cowboy?
Yes, they are on the very high level, and they're still changing. They're still moving with it. George told us that he was going back and playing with the karate movement and ranges and going back to his roots when we saw him in Kingston not long ago. So he understands how things have changed. He understands the biggest change we talked about on 5 rounds. We're talking about it a little deeper. In boxing, we walk into the range where we can box. And maybe we stay outside of it a little bit, but out past that, nothing happens. And in mixed martial arts, we kind of did that for a while. We walked into the range where I could start hitting you, and when I get there, you can hit me, and now we have a fight. Now people are playing way outside of that. The movement patterns and the way that they change direction between improving their athleticism with agility and direction change, as well as the footwork techniques, it's really changed dramatically. You know, I watched every single moment of Jorge Masvidal's UFC career over the last couple of days. I'm building a breakdown to show people how special he is. He was way out front of this. There are fights where you see him pop in with that low side kick, pop in with that low side kick, draw back, boom. And a second and a third while backing up. We all freaked out when Conor did it so crisply to Eddie Alvarez. He's been doing that. Jorge's been doing that for years. So he's well designed to compete by today's standards. And Cowboy Cerrone has just gotten better and better and better, physically, technically, mentally, everything. These are 2 guys for sure at the top.
Who are some of the coaches that you draw upon, the ones at the forefront of this innovation that you look at that are thinking at this level and implementing it with their fighters?
Yeah, it's really fun to study these guys. The best ones understand this. We talked about it on something earlier today, that constant improvement is not the same as innovation. They're separate things. Constant improvement pulls you towards perfection of that thing. Innovation is saying that thing, we'll figure out how to beat it. So when McGregor started to figure out how to beat, or Stephen Thompson started to design a game, it wasn't just Stephen Thompson's a karate fighter. Stephen Thompson's game is, hey, if Johnny Hendricks can't grab me and he can't hold me and I can keep moving and hitting him, I'll beat him. We had built the prototypical wrestler boxer, and then we found this through movement, Dominic Cruz, they can't be grabbed and they get beaten. And the best coaches, Matt Hume has been moving in that direction for a long time. Greg Jackson, I had a good chat with him, a couple of them. One was on camera, it's on our YouTube page. And through understanding changing game theory, he understands how to innovate within it. He also decentralized, so instead of everybody's training the same things, he customizes the skill set and development for each guy. Greg Jackson, Matt Hume, Eric Del Fieri, Dwayne Ludwig, there's a lot of these guys, and they're in their own arms race. TJ, Dominic, and Cody are in an arms race, and some of these coaches are in an arms race of innovation and development.
So cool. One last thing on the welterweight division, John. If you are looking into your crystal ball, A, does Nick Diaz fight this year? And B, what kind of scenario do you see him in? Is he someone that you would want to be in a championship picture, even what he said publicly about fighting for titles? Where does Nick Diaz fit? Because he is this massive piece of the welterweight puzzle that has not been present for 2 years now.
Nick Diaz has been very, very vocal about his love-hate relationship with fighting. He says, at this point, I don't need to do this. And if you want me, if the sport of mixed martial arts wants me to compete, I need massive fights. I need the biggest names, and I need the biggest paydays possible. And based on especially the landscape right now with George not here, Anderson's days are done. Conor McGregor, when is he coming back? Ronda Rousey, Brock Lesnar, the biggest names in the sport. We just don't know when they're going to step foot in the cage. Nick Diaz is a commodity, so you have to pay him. And just like Tyron Woodley said, I want Nick Diaz. Of course he wants Nick Diaz because he knows that Nick Diaz draws attention. The UFC feels, well, we can't put Nick Diaz in a championship fight. Look at his record over the last number of fights. Nick Diaz is a star. People pay to see stars. On top of it, he's a fighter, so he covers all your bases. I think you just got to let Nick Diaz have the fight that he wants, give him the biggest names.
Does him and George St-Pierre rematch make sense now? Because that was the name he threw out.
Yeah.
For, we've seen the fight. It was, a fairly convincing win from St-Pierre. But now, with the years removed from it, and it's a fight that I think it entices both guys, and it's one that you can't say that that's not going to be a big marquee fight, especially this year where you don't have a huge amount of big money fights at your disposal.
I agree. But is the UFC going to pay the type of money that's going to cost?
Or maybe several $1 million.
That's the $10 million question. The answer is, if they can make let's say they cost $20 million between them, if they can make $21 million from it, they'll do it, because that's how business works. And it's an interesting one for me. The idea, you're talking right here to a guy who is so much driven by the sport and the honesty and the purity of the sport. I want to see the best guy, the most deserving guy, fight for the title. But we lost that fight. We lost that fight years ago. And I also don't exist in a reality where I just throw a temper tantrum until I can get my way back. That's gone. We lost that. Nick Diaz can fight for a title, and nobody's going to give a crap. And the people who do, the people who freak out and go on to social media and this is unfair, are selling that fight for the UFC.
Exactly.
Engagement is all they want. That engagement come with awesome Nick Diaz is fighting, or no way, this is BS. We're all playing the game. We're all selling the fight however we react.
And if you want to talk about selling a fight that would make sense to me and to the UFC, Nick Diaz fighting Michael Bisping at 185 pounds for the championship. The level of...
Robbie Lawler's out there.
Robbie Lawler, but again, Robbie Lawler doesn't say anything. He sat there with Jose Aldo and Conor McGregor and said, great, these guys are going to sell the fight. Nick Diaz, as much as he respects Robbie Lawler, he needs somebody that's going to do their part to make the pay-per-views that much higher. And imagine what Michael Bisping will say about Nick Diaz in the lead up to this fight and the back and forth. And on top of that, what would happen on fight night? Tremendous.
It is crazy how much we're drawn to emotion. If Wanderlei Silva ends up fighting Chael Sonnen, finally he'll get to hit him. He's going to hit him the same way, whether he's mad or not. In fact, it's fairly proven that when you're mad, you can't hit as hard as when you're free.
But are these guys acting? If you're Michael, I'm sure he does. But Nick Diaz, when he's playing this game, when he gets into the cage door and the cage door closes, Nick Diaz is able to keep everything calm.
Yeah, because he's a brilliant martial artist. In the lead up to it, his hatred and his anger at you for daring to fight him, I believe that's authentic. I believe that's who he is. It's been how he's come up in the world.
And that gets released.
Yeah, and when it goes into fight, once the fight begins, once he gets going, he lets go of the steering wheel and he lets the painting paint itself.
Well, there's a lot of interesting fights coming up in the next few months at welterweight. First up is Donald Cerrone and Jorge Masvidal. That's happening next weekend on Fox from Denver, Colorado. And then Tyron Woodley, Stephen Thompson set for March the 4th at UFC 209.